He wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that kind of cold. Not buried in silence that deep. The kind of silence that swallows sound before it ever has a chance to exist. The wind howled across the open stretch of snow like something alive, slicing through the pine trees and dragging loose ice crystals across the frozen ground. It was just passed on in the high country of northern Montana, where the temperature had dropped well below zero overnight, cold enough to turn breath into smoke and thought into instinct. Lucas Hale moved steadily through the white expanse, each step crunching beneath his boots, his shoulders hunched against the wind. Beside him, Shadow tracked forward with quiet precision, his dark coat dusted with frost, his breath rising in slow, controlled bursts. They had been out for hours already, scanning the ridgeline after a storm that had rolled in fast and left just as quickly, the kind that erased trails, buried roads, and sometimes things people didn't want found. Lucas wasn't expecting anything. Not today. This was routine. Just another sweep. Just another stretch of empty land that looked the same in every direction. Until Shadow stopped. Not a bark. Not a growl. Just stopped. His body went still in a way that didn't belong to rest. His ears tilted forward, locked onto something unseen, his gaze fixed on a small rise in the snow about 30 feet ahead. Lucas took 2 more steps before he noticed the tension on the leash. "Shadow," he muttered, his voice low, barely carrying in the wind. The dog didn't move, didn't blink. There was something different in his stance. Not alert, not aggressive. Something quieter, something heavier. Lucas followed the line of Shadow's gaze. At first, he saw nothing, just snow, wind-shaped ridges, a broken branch half buried near a drift. Then his eyes adjusted. There it was, a lump, small, uneven, too rounded to be natural, too deliberate to ignore. Lucas exhaled slowly, the air catching in his throat as it crystallized in front of him. "Probably debris," he said, more to himself than to the dog. Storms dragged things across miles out here. Pieces of wood, old tarps, trash that didn't belong to anyone anymore. He gave the leash a gentle tug. "Come on." Shadow didn't budge. Instead, a low sound slipped from his throat. Not a warning, not fear, something closer to a plea. Lucas frowned. That sound didn't belong to training. It wasn't command-based. It wasn't tactical. It was instinct. Raw, unfiltered. He looked back at the lump. The wind shifted slightly, brushing a thin veil of powder off its surface. Just enough to reveal something beneath. Not rock, not wood. Fabric. Faded. Frozen stiff. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. "No," he whispered under his breath, though he didn't know what he was denying yet. He stepped forward, slower now, boots sinking deeper into the drift as he approached. Shadow moved with him this time, but only just staying close, eyes never leaving that spot. 10 feet away. The shape became clearer. 5 feet. Lucas crouched, his gloved hand hovering just above the surface before he made contact. The cold hit instantly, even through the fabric of his glove. This wasn't just frozen. This was sealed, preserved in a way that didn't feel natural. His hand brushed away a thin layer of snow. More fabric appeared. Dark, heavy, like a coat. His pulse quickened. "It's nothing," he muttered again, but his voice had changed. Less certain. The wind died for a moment, just enough for the world to hold its breath. And in that stillness, he heard it. So faint it almost wasn't there. A sound that didn't belong to the cold. Not the wind. Not the trees. Something softer. Fragile. Alive. Lucas froze. His eyes snapped to Shadow. The dog was already looking at him now, not the mound. As if to say there. "You hear it too." Lucas swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the freezing air. Every instinct told him to move faster. Every doubt told him it might already be too late. He reached for the knife at his belt, fingers stiff, heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The world narrowed to that single spot in the snow. That single impossible sound. And the question he didn't want to ask. What if something was still in there, waiting? Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. Lucas did not move right away. The knife stayed in his hand, but his body held still, as if some part of him was waiting for the sound to come again, to prove it was real and not just the wind bending through branches or memory playing tricks in the cold. The silence stretched thin, fragile, like glass under pressure. Then it came back, faint, broken, a breath that did not belong to the storm. Shadow stepped closer, his paws pressing carefully into the snow, lowering his head toward the mound without touching it, his ears flicking forward and back as if tracking something too quiet for human ears. Lucas exhaled slowly, forcing his fingers to steady. He had been in worse conditions. He had made harder calls, but something about this felt different. Not danger. Not yet. Something else. Something that carried weight before it even had a name. He dropped to one knee, the snow immediately soaking through the fabric, cold biting deep and fast. The knife hovered over the frozen surface. The outer layer was not just snow. It was packed solid, wind-pressed and glazed with ice, the kind that formed when temperatures dropped too quickly for anything beneath to breathe. He pressed the blade down. The first contact made a sharp, brittle sound, a crack that echoed too loudly in the open air. Lucas paused, eyes lifting, scanning the empty horizon as if expecting the world to react. Nothing moved. No birds. No distant engine. Just the wind returning in a low, endless sweep. He leaned in again and cut deeper, carving a narrow line across the surface. Ice splintered away in small shards, sliding down the sides of the mound. Each movement felt slower than it should have been, like time itself had thickened in the cold. Shadow shifted beside him, letting out a soft, restless breath, then another, his body angled protectively toward the mound. Lucas worked faster now, using the edge of the blade to pry apart the frozen crust. Beneath it, the snow changed texture, softer, packed differently, and then his glove brushed against something that was not snow at all. Fabric again, thicker this time, a coat. He pushed more snow aside, his breath growing uneven. The shape beneath began to form, curves that did not belong to the land, lines that suggested something folded in on itself. Lucas felt a tight pressure build in his chest. He knew that shape. He had seen it before, in places far from here, in moments that did not leave a man unchanged. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he did not know who he was speaking to yet. The words came out instinctively, pulled from somewhere deeper than thought. He cleared more snow, his hands moving faster now, no longer careful about the cold biting through his gloves. The fabric gave way to a shoulder, a human shoulder, frozen stiff beneath layers of ice and cloth. Lucas froze for half a second, the world narrowing again, his pulse loud in his ears. Then a sound came back, slightly stronger this time, not from the shoulder, lower, closer to the center of the form. Shadow let out a low whine, stepping in closer, his nose hovering just above the surface, careful, controlled, as if he understood that one wrong movement could break something fragile. Lucas swallowed hard and shifted his position, brushing away snow from the center of the shape. The coat opened slightly under his touch, stiff but not sealed completely. And there, tucked beneath the outer layer, something moved. Small, barely visible, a tremor. Lucas sucked in a sharp breath, his hand instinctively reaching forward. He peeled the fabric back just enough to see inside. His vision caught, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. There was a second form, smaller, curled tightly against the body beneath the coat. Hidden, protected. The realization hit him all at once, heavy and immediate. This was not just someone caught in the storm. This was someone who had tried to hold something else safe from it. Lucas's hand hovered, afraid to move too quickly, afraid that whatever fragile thread still held on beneath that frozen shell might snap if he rushed. "I've got you," he said, his voice low, steady now, the kind of tone he used when everything depended on calm. Shadow shifted again, pressing closer, his body heat radiating toward the small opening Lucas had uncovered. The dog's breath came in, slow, deliberate waves, as if he understood exactly what was needed. Lucas slid his hand carefully inside the coat, feeling past the frozen outer layer until his fingers reached something softer, warmer. Not warm enough, but not gone. Not yet. His heart pounded harder, urgency replacing hesitation. There was still time. Maybe not much, but enough. He pulled his hand back, already moving, already thinking, already fighting against the cold and the seconds slipping through it, because whatever was inside that coat had not stopped fighting yet, and neither was he. Lucas did not hesitate this time. The moment his fingers felt that faint, impossible warmth, something inside him shifted from doubt to command. Training took over, not the kind written in manuals, but the kind carved into muscle memory through years of learning how to act when seconds mattered more than anything else. He widened the opening in the coat, careful but urgent, his hands working against the stiffness of frozen fabric that resisted every movement. The wind rose again, sharper now, biting at his exposed skin, but he barely noticed it. His focus narrowed to what lay beneath. The smaller form trembled once, so slight it could have been missed if he had not been looking directly at it. Lucas leaned closer, shielding the opening with his body, blocking the wind as best he could. "Stay with me," he said again, softer now, the words carrying more weight, as if speaking them could anchor something fragile in place. Shadow pressed in beside him, his flank against Lucas's arm, his body heat forming a barrier against the cold. The dog's breathing changed, slower, deeper, as if he was trying to steady the world around them. Lucas slid his hands further inside, carefully freeing the smaller body from the grip of the frozen coat. The layers clung stubbornly, ice bonding fabric to fabric, but he worked them loose piece by piece, his fingers numbing as he went. Finally, the shape came free. He lifted it gently, cradling it close to his chest. A child, small, light in a way that felt wrong, as if too much had already been taken by the cold. The child's face was pale, lips faintly blue, eyes closed, lashes dusted with frost. But there was again that fragile sign, a breath, shallow, uneven, still there. Lucas felt his own breath catch, a mix of relief and urgency colliding in his chest. "You are still here," he whispered, more to himself than to the child. Behind him, the larger form remained partially buried, the outline of the adult still visible beneath the snow and ice, unmoving, silent. Lucas glanced back for a fraction of a second, his jaw tightening, the weight of that sight pressing in, but he forced his focus forward. There was no time to divide attention. Not yet. He shifted his position, pulling the child closer, tucking them inside his own jacket, using his body heat as a shield. The cold fought back immediately, seeping through every layer, but he adjusted, pressing the child against his chest, one arm wrapped securely around them. "I have got you," he murmured, his voice steady despite the storm building around them. Shadow moved quickly now, circling once before settling close to Lucas's side, his body angled to block the wind from another direction. The dog's eyes flicked between Lucas and the partially uncovered form behind them, then back again, as if holding both realities at once. Lucas reached for his radio with his free hand, fingers stiff, movements slower than he wanted. He pressed the button, the static crackling through the small speaker. "This is Hale," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, controlled but urgent. "I have got a live recovery. Repeat, live recovery. I need immediate support at my coordinates." The response came through broken at first, the signal struggling against the terrain, then clearer. "Copy that, Hale. Confirm one survivor." Lucas looked down at the child, feeling that faint breath against his chest, counting it without thinking, measuring time in inhales and exhales. "One confirmed," he answered. A pause. Then quieter, "Possibly more, but I cannot verify yet." The wind surged again, carrying fine snow across the ground, beginning to fill in the space he had cleared, trying to erase what had been revealed. Lucas adjusted his stance, rising carefully to his feet, every movement deliberate to avoid jarring. The child, his legs protested, stiff from the cold and the kneeling, but he pushed through it. "Stay with me," he said again, his voice low, steady, as much a command as a promise. The child's head shifted slightly against his chest, a small, fragile movement that sent a sharp pulse of hope through him. Shadow let out a soft sound, almost a breath of relief, and pressed closer as Lucas began to move, each step slow and measured across the uneven snow. But after only a few steps, Lucas stopped. Something held him there. Not the wind, not the terrain, something else. He turned his head slightly, looking back at the partially uncovered form still resting in the snow, the outline now sharper against the white as the light shifted. For a moment, the world seemed to quiet again, the storm pulling back just enough to let that image settle. Lucas's grip tightened slightly around the child, his jaw set, the weight of the choice pressing in without words. Then Shadow did something unexpected. The dog stepped away from Lucas and walked back toward the frozen form, slow, deliberate, as if drawn by something deeper than instinct. He stopped beside it, lowering himself down, his body curling slightly against the snow, his head resting gently near the still figure. Lucas watched, his chest tightening, understanding dawning in a way that did not need explanation. The storm moved around them, but in that moment, there was something steady beneath it, something that had not been broken by the cold. Lucas stood there longer than he should have. The wind pulled at his jacket, the cold biting deeper with every second he remained still, but something in him refused to move forward just yet. The child rested against his chest, fragile but present, each faint breath a quiet reminder that time was still moving, whether he was ready or not. Behind him, Shadow did not look back. The dog remained beside the still figure in the snow, his body curled slightly, his head lowered in a way that felt less like rest and more like vigil. Lucas swallowed hard, his throat tight, the weight of the moment pressing into him in a way no training had ever prepared him for. He took a step back toward them, just one, careful not to jostle the child, careful not to let the wind cut through the small pocket of warmth he had created. His boots sank into the snow again, the sound louder now, heavier, as if each step carried more than just his weight. Shadow, he called quietly. The dog's ears twitched, but he did not move. Lucas came closer, stopping just beside them, his eyes settling on the form beneath the ice and fabric. The outline was clearer now. A shoulder, an arm curved inward. The posture of someone who had not fallen, but chosen. Chosen to hold. Chosen a shield. Lucas knelt again, slower this time, the urgency in his movements tempered by something else, something like respect. He shifted the child slightly, securing them more firmly against his chest, then reached out with his free hand. The fabric of the coat was stiff, frozen into place, but he brushed away a thin layer of snow that had begun to settle again. Beneath it, the shape of the adult's arm became more defined, wrapped tightly around where the child had been hidden. Lucas paused, his hand hovering just above the surface, unsure for a moment what he was reaching for. Not confirmation. He already knew. Something else. Something quieter. His fingers moved slowly, tracing the edge of the coat until they found a small opening near the hand. The glove was worn, the material cracked slightly from the cold, but the grip was still firm, even in stillness. Lucas gently loosened it, just enough to see what lay within. There, tucked carefully in the frozen grasp, was a small strip of fabric. Faded, softened by time. He pulled it free with care, the motion deliberate, as if it mattered how it was taken. The cloth unfolded slightly in his hand. A name stitched unevenly across it. Not official, not issued, made by hand. Lucas stared at it for a second longer than he intended, the meaning settling in without explanation. He closed his hand around it, his jaw tightening as he drew in a slow breath. The wind picked up again, swirling snow around them, beginning to blur the edges of the moment, as if the world was trying to reclaim what had been uncovered. Lucas looked at Shadow. The dog finally lifted his head, his eyes meeting Lucas's. There was no command in that look, no expectation, just a quiet understanding. Lucas nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "We have to go," he said, his voice low, steady, but softer than before. Shadow rose slowly, stepping back from the still figure, but not turning away immediately. He lingered for a moment, his gaze resting on the form beneath the snow, before finally shifting his body toward Lucas. Lucas stood carefully, adjusting his hold on the child, ensuring their face was shielded from the wind, their small body as protected as possible within the warmth of his jacket. He took one last look at the figure behind them, the shape already beginning to soften under the drifting snow, the edges less distinct with each passing second. There were no words for that moment, none that would carry what needed to be said. So he did not try. He turned, setting his focus forward again, each step deliberate as he began to move across the snow. Shadow fell into place beside him, close enough that Lucas could feel the dog's presence without looking. The storm pressed in again, the wind louder now, the cold sharper, but something had changed. The emptiness of the landscape no longer felt the same. It carried weight now. Memory. Lucas tightened his hold slightly, feeling the faint movement against his chest, that fragile, steady rhythm that refused to disappear. "You are not done yet," he murmured, his breath visible in the air, his voice steady despite the storm. Behind them, the snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless, covering what remained, not erasing it, but holding it in a stillness that felt almost like peace. And ahead, through the blur of white and wind, there was only one direction left to go. The wind did not ease as Lucas moved. If anything, it pressed harder, curling through the open stretch of land like it was trying to turn him back, like the mountain itself was testing how much he was willing to carry. Each step sank deeper now, the snow uneven beneath his boots, hidden drifts swallowing his footing without warning. He adjusted his balance instinctively, tightening his grip around the child, keeping them steady against his chest. The small body shifted again, a faint, fragile motion that sent a sharp pulse through him. Not gone, not fading, still fighting. "That is it," he murmured under his breath. "Stay right there." His voice was low, controlled, the same tone he had used in darker places, in moments where holding on was the only thing that mattered. Shadow moved just ahead of him now, no longer scanning wide, no longer searching. The dog's focus had narrowed, his path deliberate, cutting through the snow with a quiet certainty that did not need direction. Lucas followed without question. The horizon was barely visible, swallowed by white and motion, but Shadow did not hesitate. 50 yards, maybe more. Distance became something abstract out here, measured less by ground and more by endurance. Lucas's legs began to burn, the cold working its way deeper into muscle, slowing reaction, dulling sensation. He pushed through it, breath steady, counting steps without realizing it. 10, 20, 30, each one a refusal to stop. The child's breathing changed again. Lucas felt it before he heard it, a slight shift in rhythm, uneven, as if the body was struggling to remember how to continue. He stopped immediately, dropping to one knee again, shielding the child from the wind with his body. "Hey," he said softly, his voice closer now, more personal. "You are not done. You hear me?" "Not yet." He opened his jacket slightly, just enough to see the child's face. The frost had begun to melt where his body heat reached, leaving damp strands of hair clinging to the skin. The lips moved, barely, a small tremor that carried more meaning than words. Lucas exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "That is it. Stay with me." Shadow circled back instantly, sensing the change, his body pressing close again, offering warmth without needing to be told. The dog's nose hovered near the child's face, his breath slow and deliberate, as if sharing something unseen. Lucas watched for a second, something unspoken passing between them, then nodded once to himself. He could not stay here long. Every second spent still was a second the cold gained ground. He pulled the jacket closed again, securing the child, and pushed himself back to his feet. The effort was heavier this time. His legs resisted, the cold settling deeper, but he forced movement, step by step, refusing to let the weight slow him down. The radio crackled at his side, a burst of static breaking through the wind. "Hale, this is base. We have your position. Rescue team is inbound. Estimated arrival 8 minutes. Can you maintain?" Lucas lifted the radio, his grip firm despite the numbness creeping into his fingers. "I will maintain," he answered, his voice steady. leaving no space for doubt. 8 minutes. Out here, that could stretch into something longer. Or it could be just enough. He kept moving. The terrain shifted slightly, the incline rising just enough to strain his steps further. Snow slid beneath his boots, forcing him to adjust constantly, to compensate, to keep from losing balance. Shadow moved ahead again, then stopped abruptly, turning back toward Lucas with a sharp, focused look. Lucas followed his gaze. Through the veil of snow and wind, a darker shape emerged. Faint at first, then clearer. The outline of a tree line breaking the open stretch. Shelter. Not complete, but enough to cut the wind, enough to buy time. Lucas angled toward it immediately, his pace quickening despite the strain. Each step felt heavier now, the weight in his arms not physical, but something else. Responsibility. Promise. He reached the edge of the trees and stepped into the partial cover, the wind dropping just enough to make a difference. The silence here was different. Less violent. More contained. Lucas lowered himself carefully against the trunk of a large pine, using it as a shield, his back pressing into the rough bark. He adjusted the child again, opening his jacket just enough to check. The breathing was still there. Faint, uneven, but holding. "You made it this far," he whispered, his voice softer now, almost steady with something that felt like belief. "Do not stop now." Shadow settled beside them, his body close, his eyes alert but calmer, as if he knew they had reached a point that mattered. Lucas looked out through the trees, the storm still moving beyond, the open snow stretching back in the direction they had come from. Somewhere out there, beneath the falling white, a story had ended so another could continue. He felt the weight of that without needing to look back. The radio crackled again, closer this time, voices sharper, clearer, cutting through the storm with purpose. Lucas closed his eyes for half a second, just enough to steady himself, then opened them again, his focus returning to the small, fragile life against his chest. 8 minutes had not broken them, and he was not about to let the next one do it either. The shelter of the trees did not bring warmth, but it brought something close enough to matter. The wind lost its edge here, breaking against the trunks and branches, turning from a cutting force into a restless whisper that moved through needles and bark. Lucas leaned back against the pine, feeling the rough surface press into his shoulders, grounding him for a moment he did not realize he needed. His breath came slower now, controlled but heavy with effort. The child remained against his chest, small and fragile, their presence both a weight and a reason to keep holding steady. He adjusted his jacket again, sealing in what little heat he could, his hands moving with careful precision despite the numbness creeping into his fingers. "Stay with me," he said quietly, the words softer now, almost like a rhythm, something meant to keep time moving forward. Shadow shifted beside him, his body pressed close, his warmth constant and unwavering. The dog's ears flicked toward the distance, catching something beyond what Lucas could hear at first. A faint vibration, low, mechanical. Lucas stilled, listening. There it was, distant but real. The sound of an engine cutting through the storm, still far, but moving closer. Relief flickered through him, quick and sharp, but it did not settle. Not yet. Not until the child was in someone else's hands. Not until this moment passed fully into something safe. He looked down again, opening his jacket slightly, careful not to let the cold rush in too fast. The child's face had changed. The stillness was different now. Not as deep. The lips parted slightly, a shallow breath escaping, followed by another. Uneven, but present. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but the kind of hope that came with responsibility. "You hear that," he murmured. "That is your ride coming." The child did not respond, not in any way that could be seen, but Lucas felt the faintest shift against him, a subtle movement that spoke louder than any sound. Shadow leaned in closer, his nose brushing lightly against the edge of the jacket, his breath steady, his presence anchored in a way that made the moment feel less alone. The sound of the engine grew stronger now, clearer, cutting through the trees with purpose. Lucas reached for his radio again, pressing the button with a firm hand. "I have visual on partial cover," he said, his voice steady despite the fatigue settling into his bones. Moving to open space for extraction. The reply came quickly this time, sharp and direct. Copy that, Hale. We see your signal. Hold position or move 10 yards east for better clearance. Lucas glanced through the trees, measuring distance, calculating the safest path without exposing the child to the full force of the wind again. 10 yards. Not far, but far enough to matter. He tightened his hold slightly, bracing himself as he pushed up from the ground. His legs protested immediately, the cold and strain catching up all at once, but he did not hesitate. We are moving, he said quietly, more to the child than anyone else. Shadow was already on his feet, stepping ahead, his body angled into the wind as they moved out from the shelter. The cold hit again, sharp and immediate, but this time Lucas was ready for it. Each step was deliberate, controlled, his focus locked forward, the sound of the engine guiding him like a beacon through the storm. The snow swirled harder here, the open space offering no protection, but he kept moving, counting steps without realizing it. 5, 6, 7. The engine roared louder now, close enough that he could feel the vibration in the air, the promise of help just beyond the curtain of white. And then he saw it. The outline of the rescue vehicle, its lights cutting through the storm, bright and steady, a sharp contrast to the gray world around it. Figures moved beside it, silhouettes at first, then clearer as they approached. Lucas slowed only slightly, careful not to lose balance as the ground shifted beneath him. Over here, one of the rescuers called, their voice strong, carrying through the wind. Lucas nodded, though he knew they might not see it, and closed the final distance. Hands reached out, steady and practiced, taking over without hesitation. We have got them, another voice said, calm, certain. Lucas hesitated for half a second as the child was gently taken from his arms, the sudden absence of that small weight leaving a hollow space he was not prepared for. He watched closely, his eyes tracking every movement as they wrapped the child, shielding them, checking, working quickly but carefully. Breathing is shallow but present, one of them said. We are getting them warmed up now. Lucas let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, the tension in his chest easing just enough to allow something else to surface. Not relief. Not yet. Something quieter. Something deeper. Shadow stepped up beside him, his body brushing against Lucas's leg, his presence steady as ever. Lucas reached down instinctively, his hand resting against the dog's neck, fingers threading through the thick fur, grounding himself in something familiar. The storm still moved around them, the wind still howled, but the center of it had shifted. What had been fragile was now held by more than just him. And for the first time since he had knelt in the snow, Lucas allowed himself to believe that this was not where the story would end. The moment the child left his arms, the cold came rushing back in. Not the kind that bites at the skin, but the kind that settles deeper, in places you do not expect, where warmth had been holding something together. Lucas stood there for a second longer than necessary, his hands still slightly curved as if they remembered the shape they had been carrying. The rescuers moved with precision, wrapping the child, checking breathing, securing warmth in layers Lucas could not provide alone. Their voices were calm, practiced, but urgent in a way that did not need to be loud. We have got a pulse, one of them said, and though Lucas had already felt it, hearing it spoken out loud made something inside him shift. Not relief. Not yet. Something steadier. Something that could become relief if it was allowed to. Shadow remained at his side, unmoving, his eyes tracking every motion of the team, his ears flicking at each sound as if still measuring the situation, still deciding whether the danger had truly passed. Lucas lowered his hand to the dog's neck again, feeling the warmth there, the steady presence that had not faltered once. You did good, he murmured, his voice quiet, the words simple but carrying more weight than they sounded. Shadow did not react outwardly, but his posture softened just slightly, the tension easing by a fraction. One of the rescuers turned toward Lucas, his face partially obscured by the hood and the blowing snow. We need to move, he said, his tone firm but not rushed. Storm is shifting again. We will transport the child first. Lucas nodded, his body responding before his thoughts caught up. There is another, he said, his voice lower now, carrying something heavier. The rescuer paused for half a second, reading the meaning behind the words without needing further explanation. Location. Lucas turned, lifting his arm and pointing back toward the open stretch of snow, now barely visible through the storm. About 200 yards back, partially buried, covered by drift. The rescuer gave a short nod, already signaling to another member of the team. We will send a second unit. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of knowing what they would find. He did not say more. He did not need to. The wind shifted again, stronger now, carrying a sharp edge that cut through the brief stillness the rescue had created. The team moved quickly, lifting the child onto a stretcher, securing them with practiced care. The small form disappeared beneath layers designed to hold warmth, to protect, to give time back to a body that had nearly lost it. Lucas watched every movement, his eyes fixed, his focus unbroken. You coming with us? The rescuer asked, glancing back. Lucas hesitated for the first time since the moment. Shadow had stopped in the snow. Not long, just enough for something inside him to surface. He looked back again, toward the direction they had come from. The storm had already begun to erase the path, smoothing over tracks, covering signs, turning everything back into a blank stretch of white. But he knew where it was. He could still see it in his mind, clear and unmoving. The shape beneath the snow, the posture that had told a story without words. He exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cold air, then turned back. I will follow in the second unit, he said. His voice was steady, but quieter now, as if something in him had shifted from urgency to intention. The rescuer studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, we will get this one stabilized. Lucas stepped back as they moved, giving space, watching as the team carried the child toward the vehicle. The engine roared louder as the doors opened, the inside lights spilling out into the storm, a brief, warm contrast to the cold world outside. The stretcher disappeared inside, followed by two of the team members, their movements quick but controlled. The door closed with a solid sound that seemed to mark a boundary. What had been fragile was now held. What had been uncertain now had direction. The vehicle shifted slightly as it prepared to move, tires gripping against the snow, engine pushing against the resistance of the storm. Lucas stood there, unmoving, his eyes following it as it pulled away, the lights fading slightly into the white until they became just another glow in the distance. Shadow remained beside him, his gaze following the same path, his body still, as if understanding that something important had just left, carried forward into something unknown. The wind filled the space again, louder now, reclaiming the quiet that had briefly settled. Lucas drew in a slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling as he reset himself, grounding his focus once more. We are not done, he said quietly, his voice steady, directed not just at Shadow, but the moment itself. The second vehicle approached from the side, its engine cutting through the storm with a deeper sound, its lights sweeping across. The snow as it came to a stop. A door opened, and another rescuer stepped out, bracing against the wind. Show us, he called out. Lucas did not hesitate this time. He turned, his body already moving, Shadow, falling in a step beside him without command. Together, they stepped back into the storm, retracing the path that was no longer visible, guided not by tracks, but by something that did not fade with the snow. The storm did not remember where they had come from. It had already erased their path, smoothed over every footprint, buried every sign beneath a fresh layer of white that shifted and moved with each gust of wind. But Lucas did not need to see the path. He carried it in his mind, each step retraced by instinct, by memory, by something deeper that had taken hold the moment Shadow refused to walk away. The second rescue vehicle idled behind them, its engine a low, steady presence, its lights cutting through the storm just enough to give direction without comfort. Lucas moved ahead of it, his pace steady despite the fatigue settling into his muscles, Shadow at his side, slightly ahead, guiding without needing to be told. This way, Lucas called back, his voice carried unevenly by the wind, but strong enough to reach the team behind him. The rescuers followed, their movements deliberate, equipment secured, each step measured against the unstable ground beneath the snow. The distance felt longer this time, not because it had changed, but because the weight of what waited at the end had grown heavier with each passing second. Lucas felt it with every step, not slowing him, but anchoring him, reminding him why they had turned back into the storm. Shadow stopped first. The dog's body stilled, his posture shifting into that same quiet alertness Lucas had seen before, that moment where instinct spoke louder than anything else. Lucas halted immediately, his eyes scanning the ground ahead. At first, there was nothing, just snow, endless, shifting, indistinguishable from the rest. Then the wind shifted just slightly, peeling back a thin layer, revealing the faintest outline beneath. A curve, a break in the surface. Not enough for anyone else to notice yet, but enough. Here, Lucas said, his voice lower now, more controlled. He stepped forward, dropping to one knee again, his hands already moving, brushing away the top layer of snow with careful urgency. The rescuers closed in around him, forming a barrier against the wind, their presence steady, practiced, respectful of the moment unfolding beneath their hands. Snow gave way slowly at first, then more easily as they cleared the drift, revealing the same shape Lucas had left behind. The coat, the posture, the stillness that had not changed. One of the rescuers knelt beside him, his movements precise, methodical, confirming what did not need to be spoken. The others worked quietly, uncovering more, not rushing, not forcing, but revealing what the storm had tried to take back. Shadow moved closer, stopping just beside the form, lowering himself once more, his body curling slightly, his head resting near the shoulder as it had before. He did not touch, not fully, just close enough to be present. Lucas watched him for a moment, something tightening in his chest, something that had no name but carried meaning all the same. She held on. Lucas said quietly, his voice barely above the wind, the words not meant for the team, but for the truth that had already settled in. One of the rescuers glanced at him briefly, then nodded once, understanding without needing explanation. They continued their work, careful, deliberate, honoring the shape of what had happened here without disturbing it more than necessary. Lucas reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the small piece of fabric he had taken earlier. He pulled it out slowly, unfolding it just enough to see the name stitched across it. The thread was uneven, handmade, each letter carrying the care of someone who had taken time, even in a world that did not always allow for it. He looked at it for a moment, then lowered his hand, placing it gently against the coat where it had once been held. Not replacing it exactly, just returning it close. Shadow shifted slightly, his eyes lifting to Lucas's, holding his gaze for a brief second. There was something in that look, not sadness, not confusion, something steadier, recognition maybe, of what had been done, of what had been given. The wind moved around them again, but softer now, less aggressive, as if the storm itself had lost some of its urgency. The rescuers finished clearing the area, their movements slowing, their focus shifting from action to acknowledgement. "We will bring her in," one of them said quietly, his tone respectful, measured. Lucas nodded, his expression unchanged, but his eyes steady, fixed on the form for one last moment before he stood. His legs felt heavier now, not from the cold, but from something else that had settled deeper. He stepped back, giving the team space, watching as they prepared to carry what remained with the same care they had given the living. Shadow rose slowly, stepping back as well, but not turning away immediately. He lingered for a moment, his gaze resting on the place where the snow had been disturbed, where the story had revealed itself in silence. Then, finally, he turned, moving back toward Lucas, his body brushing lightly against his leg as if to anchor him in the present again. Lucas exhaled slowly, his breath steady now, his focus returning to the world around him. The storm still moved. The cold still pressed in. But something had changed. Not in the landscape, not in the wind, in the space between what had been lost and what had been saved. And in that space, something remained, something that would not be buried again. The return felt quieter than the journey out, though the storm had not lessened. The wind still moved across the open land, carrying snow in restless waves, but inside Lucas, something had shifted into a stillness that the weather could not touch. He walked beside the rescue team as they brought the covered form back toward the vehicle, each step measured, each movement deliberate. No one rushed. There was no need now. Tom had already made his decision out there in the snow. What remained was care, respect, and the quiet understanding that not every story ends the same way, even when it begins in the same storm. Shadow stayed close, his body brushing Lucas's leg now and then, not out of uncertainty, but as if reminding him of something. Steady, something that had not been lost. Lucas reached down once, resting his hand against the dog's neck, fingers pressing gently into the thick fur, grounding himself in that simple contact. He did not speak. There were no words that felt necessary anymore. The rescue vehicle came into view again, its lights cutting through the white, its presence solid against the shifting landscape. The doors opened, and the team moved with the same careful precision as before, lifting, securing, placing. The difference now was not in their actions, but in the weight behind them. Lucas stood back, watching, his posture straight but quieter, as if the urgency that had driven him forward had given way to something deeper. When the doors closed, the sound echoed briefly against the wind, then faded into the storm. For a moment, no one moved. The engine idled, the lights remained steady, and the world seemed to pause between what had been found and what would come next. One of the rescuers stepped toward Lucas, his expression softened, respectful. "You did everything you could," he said, his voice calm, certain, not offering comfort, but acknowledging truth. Lucas nodded once, his eyes shifting briefly toward the direction they had come from, where the storm had already begun to reclaim the ground. "She did," he replied quietly. The rescuer followed his gaze, then gave a small nod, understanding without needing more. The vehicle began to move, its tires pressing into the snow, carrying both endings and beginnings away from the place where they had been uncovered. Lucas remained where he was for a few seconds longer, the wind moving around him, the cold pressing in again, but not in the same way as before. Something had changed, not in the storm. In him. He looked down at Shadow, who stood beside him, calm, steady, his amber eyes reflecting the fading lights of the vehicle as it disappeared into the distance. "You knew," Lucas said softly. It was not a question. Shadow blinked once, his gaze steady, as if the answer had never needed to be spoken. Lucas exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, then turned, beginning to walk back toward the remaining vehicle. The path was already gone, erased by the wind, but did not matter. He knew the way now, not just across the snow, but through something else that had opened and settled in the space between loss and survival. As he walked, his hand moved unconsciously to his jacket pocket, feeling for the absence of the small piece of fabric he had returned. He did not need to see again. He knew where it was, and somehow that felt right. The second vehicle waited with its engine running, a quiet invitation to leave the storm behind. Lucas paused just before reaching it, turning once more, his eyes scanning the endless white where everything had begun. There was nothing to see now. No shape, no mark, just snow, moving and shifting, carrying its silence forward. But beneath that silence, something remained. Not visible, not measurable. Something was carried in the choices made when no one was watching. In the instinct of a dog who refused to walk away. In the arms of a mother who had held on long enough for another life to continue. Lucas lowered his gaze, his expression steady, then stepped forward, climbing into the vehicle as Shadow followed without hesitation. The door closed, the engine shifted, and they began to move, leaving the place behind, but not what it had given. Outside, the storm continued, unchanged, indifferent to what had happened within it. But inside the quiet space of the vehicle, there was something else. A stillness. A weight that was not heavy, but lasting. Lucas rested his hand against Shadow's back, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath his palm, a rhythm that matched something deeper than breath. He did not look back again. He did not need to. Some stories do not stay where they happen. They move with you. They settle into the spaces you carry forward. And sometimes they do not end in victory. They end in something quieter, something that does not ask to be understood, only remembered.